Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session on more than just a map, geospatial analytics in Tableau. We're really lucky today to have Mark Seiler, who is one of our lead solution engineers here in Sydney, Australia, and he is going to be walking us through some of the great content that he delivered at Tableau conference this year. So I personally tried to go to the session and it was booked out. I got there about half an hour in advance and could not get in. So we're really lucky to have him today presenting this content. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Mark, for this awesome session.
Thanks, Grant. Very good to be introduced in this way. So welcome, everyone. So I don't know if you had a chance. So it's supposed to be a hands-on session. So hopefully you have a chance to go to that particular link here, and that will give you the option to download two things. One will be the data sets, data source that we'll be using, and there will be some scripts. So there's actually two scripts. One that you can follow along if you got Tableau Desktop installed. Otherwise, there's also the option to use Tableau Cloud, and there's instructions for both. So we just start by introducing myself quickly. So as you can see, probably I'm based in Australia, but my accent sounds French. It's because I'm originally from France. And because the session is all about the map, I created this little viz. It was one of the first viz I created when I joined Tableau. It was to show the place where I've been going in the world for at least a week. And the color is actually showing how much I've been spending in the location. So I've been spending obviously a lot of time in France where I grew up and that I left 11 years ago, and a lot of time in Australia. But I also like to travel for work. So that's why a lot of time in the US and also for leisure. So I've been spending a lot of time in North Africa where I did a few hikes and things like that. But yeah, it's just to show like the kind of thing you can do with maps. So we'll go way beyond that during today's session. So before I actually start, I just want to see, I don't know if you can raise your hand, but I would like to have a feeling of how many people have been able to download the Tableau desktop. Yes, so I don't know, maybe raise your hand if you have not been able to get Tableau desktop. And in particular, we need to have a 22.4 version. Otherwise, you might be limited to use some of the features because we're going to use some of the features which have been released quite recently. So I don't know, hopefully you have the option to raise your hand. So raise your hand if you don't have Tableau desktop. We're not using Zoom that much, so hopefully we've got the option so I can see a few hands. All right, so if you don't have Tableau desktop installed, it's not, as I say, it's not a showstopper. You will still be able to use Tableau Cloud. So we have created a login to use, and this login should be available. So remember in the Ignite file that I shared at the start, you should be able to download the scripts. So there's two scripts, one for Tableau Desktop, one for Tableau Cloud, and then there will be the data sources. If for any reason you struggle to do that, that's fine. Maybe you can just watch, and you'll be able to play to do the exercise a bit later. But my recommendation, because it's supposed to be an hands-on session, is to try to do it during the session. So with that, let's have a look at the agenda. So there will be three parts. We'll start quickly to explain a bit the history of Tableau mapping. And then the two next parts will be the part where we'll spend the most time. It will be about, first part will be using data sets with locations and latitude and longitude. And so this is generally where we start by using Tableau when it comes to map. And we'll be talking about things like geocoding, make point, buffer, and distance. And then the second part will be working with a bit more complex data sets, in particular shape files. And then we'll be talking about things like spatial interactions, map layers, functions like area, and also intersect. So essentially, the goal of this session will be that I hope everyone will have something to take away with. Because at the start it will be pretty easy, but it will grow up. And so if you know already a bit about maps, just be a bit patient. Maybe the first few minutes will be a bit too easy, but then it will go a bit more complex. And I'm sure that towards the end, we'll have learned quite a few things. So let's start with the story of mapping. So as you know, Tableau has been created quite a long time ago, 2006, I think. And pretty much at the start in 2008, there was all these features related to maps. And then there's more and more things that has been released across the different years. So if I try to categorize the geospatial capabilities into 3 categories, I would say that during the first few years, from version 4 until maybe version 10.2, it was what we call foundational. So the idea was we were giving the option for people to put things on map. So assuming that you got things like cities or state or country, we'll be able to put them on the map. Then in between 10.3 and let's say 2019.2, there was more work done on connectivity. And for instance, in addition to be able to simply connect to a data source that contain a bunch of cities or locations, we also give the option to actually open it up to things like shapefile or even Esri. And then from 2019.3 onwards, basically there was a lot of work done on the analytics side of things. So you can really use those maps data to actually get some very good insight. So I just want to show a few examples. So when we're talking about foundational, that's what I was talking about. Let's say you got the data sets, let's say Superstore, that contain, I don't know, sales number by location, postcode or cities. You'll be able to create this kind of single map. Obviously, you could also do a field map, like the one I showed before when I was showing the place where I've been. Moving a bit later, there was, I think it was around 2017, there was much more work done on connectivity. And something I mentioned, you was able then to use shapefiles to connect to, or you can even use a S3. So if you got an S3 server, you'll be able to use that and connect it to it. Then still on connectivity, because we're able to have more information, something quite important, and we'll work a bit on that today, quite a lot actually, will be the option to intersect. So essentially, we'll be able to create some special joins. So instead of just making a join based on whether the fields are identical into the 2 data sources, you'll be able to create those joins based on where things are located. And into the geospatial space or analytic space, lots of functions have been introduced along the different years. And we'll actually have a look at pretty much all of them. So things like make points, make line, distance, creating buffers, area, and so on and so forth. And it is where the power of Tableau is. And last bit, something has been introduced in 2024, is this concept of map layers. Traditionally, we've been limited to have 2 layers. Now, and you will see that during this webinar, you are able to have many more layers of that. And it's really open up to really creating a lot of insights. So hopefully that was helpful. And we can hopefully start the hands-on. So there will be 2 parts, as I said. First part will be using data sets which are in New South Wales. So they are pretty easy one, and they are public one. So as the name indicates here, I will be dealing with schools and train station in New South Wales. So I just put a bit of pictures. It was like in the US, people don't necessarily know much about Australia. So it was to highlight like what a school look like in Australia with the uniform, something quite important for American audience. So that will be one data set. And the other data set we'll be dealing with will be the train stations. And basically we want to understand relationships like how far away the schools are from train stations. So if you have downloaded the Ignite file, and if you haven't, maybe you can reach out in the Q&A box. But I will just show you how it looks like. So first, there should be a script like that in Excel. And so you can obviously try to follow what I'm doing through, or you can actually use that script to doing at your own pace. I will try to not be too fast so that you can actually follow along. As I said, there's 2 files. There's one for Tableau Desktop, which is this one, but there's another one also for Tableau Cloud, if you want to follow along. And for Tableau Cloud, there's actually, I will share that one here. There's actually 3 tabs. So one for part 1 and part 2, but there's also a first tab that gives you a way to connect to Tableau Cloud. So with the URL here, and then you can use the user here and the password. So we'll obviously all sharing the same credentials. So when you save your file, make sure that you use different names. Otherwise, you might confuse yourself. On the dataset side,
Mark, sorry, just to jump in. So for those who've joined later, we put the link up at the beginning. If you don't have the link, just pop into the Q&A a little message. We'll be able to respond to that and give you the link. Also, if you have any questions throughout the session, please do pop them into the Q&A. I'll answer what I can, and I'll get Mark to help out with anything that's beyond my knowledge.
Excellent, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so in terms of data sets, so there's a zip that you can download from the Ignite location. And then the zip, when you unzip it, you will have two folders, one with part 1, and there's 2 files into it. And then if you go to part 2, there will be a bunch of subfolders. So essentially to be for the subsection of it, right? So I recommend you to download, unzip, and then you will be able to start. All right, so let's jump in. So I will go, as I said, I will use Tableau Desktop to do my exercises. And I will put the script on the side just that I know what I'm doing. Yeah, so first thing we're gonna do is that we'll connect to the data source that contain my schools. So as you know, in Tableau, it's fairly easy. You are here. And what we want to do is we want to connect to it. It's a CSV file. Therefore, I will use the text file option. So then I just need to point to it. So here I will select my school.csv file. So it only contains one, well, because CSV, there's no option to select a tab. If it was Excel, you can actually select which tab you want. And you can actually have a look already at what is in there. So as you can see, there is one row for each school. So school code, school name, and then there's a bunch of information about where the school is located. So country, obviously, then the state, then the suburb and the postcode. And then you got more information about the school itself in terms of number of students there is, the level of school it is, whether it's a primary school, high school, and so on and so forth. And we also have LGA and latitude and longitude. So this will be helpful when we want to put the exact location of each school. But we'll not start with that. We first start by just showing how many students there is by postcode. So to do that, I will create my first sheet. And the quickest way to do that would be to bring my, I want to bring my postcode. So I can show you that. So if you go first postcode like that, if you are using a desktop, which is Australian based, it will work straight away. But if you were to use the browser, it's likely that it will actually try to plot the postcode in the US. So that's why my recommendation would be to add the country to your table of details, so that the system knows that the postcode we are dealing with are Australian based. So this is cool that I got like basically a dot for each postcode, but it doesn't bring much information. So what we want to do next is that we want to bring the measure we've got. And so on purpose, I simplify the data set a lot. So there's only one measure, which is the number of students. So the only thing I need to do here is to bring my number of students to my size. And now we have like bigger dots for postcode where there's a lot of students and smaller ones. So not surprisingly, there's a lot around the Sydney area, and there's much less around the regional areas. So obviously, you can also try to change a bit the way of the look of the map. Right now, it's a bit lame, doesn't contain much information. So if you want to do that, you know, there's different options. You can go to maps, and then you can go to background layers. And then you can see that right now we're using the light style, but I can actually change that to whatever I want. So I can do normal, for instance, or probably one if I want to get a bit of details, would be to use the street options. And when you do that, you start to see more things. So you can start to see the main cities, you can see the roads and things like that. And you can actually decide which layer you want to display. And this will actually change depending on the level of details you go to. So if I'm going, for instance, to Sydney, you will see that I will start to see much more things. And I can really see like the parks, the little roads, and so on and so forth. So we've pretty much done with the part, like section B of part 1. So the only thing I need to do here is to rename my sheets, and I will call it students. by postcode. So I assume by now, like pretty much everybody knew already how to do that, but as I said, we'll go into something a bit more complex. So yeah, bear with me. So what we want to do next is, instead of showing symbols for each postcode, we want to display the number of students by LGA. And so we want to have a field map for that. So I'll create a new sheet, and the start will be kind of the same. I will recommend to double click on country first, and then I will double click on LGA. And then right now I still have a single map, which is the default, but I can change that. So I can go here and I say I want to have the map instead. Now you can see that pretty much all my LGA are colored, but there are a few exceptions. So obviously there's Canberra here, which is technically not New South Wales, so it's okay to have it not in blue, but there are some other holes here and here and here. So why do we have that? It's because there's 4 unknowns. So if you go in here, you can actually start to read the location. So if I'm going in there, I can actually see that there are 2 kinds of issues. The first one is that you've got some locations which are ambiguous. So what does it mean ambiguous? It means that there's other LGA or other counties, and the system is not able to determine which one to display. So I need to give more information to the tool. The second one is that I've got a location that the system has not been able to pick up. So let's try to fix the first issue first. So what I need to do here is that I need to give a bit more information. So in particular, I need to specify which state I'm dealing with. The system at the moment is not able to find that information. So I'm going into a state province, and I say that I actually got a field that contains my state location. And just by doing that, you will see that now I only have 1 unknown. So there was a few blanks here and there. They are all gone. So to fix the second issue, I just need to go back on unknown. And then I will go to edit location. And so essentially, when you got this kind of issue, it means that the way it is paired with dataset does not correspond to what is in the Tableau dictionary. So I need to fix that. So obviously, you can fix it at the data source level, but you also have the option to do it at the Tableau level. So I can just type something like Glen, and then system will find out which one is the closest. So I can actually see it's that dataset, it was Glen in 7 Shire. In Tableau, it's name known as Glen in 7. So just do that, and you see this little LGA is now gone. So it's now blue. All right. So if you were using Tableau Cloud, unfortunately, you don't have the option to fix like using this window here, but you still have the option to put the state into your level of details so that you are able to actually fix most of the issues. So now what I want to do, I want to bring in my number of students, and I just need to bring that to color. And so same than before, you can see that there's actually a lot of students around the scene area, which is why I've got the dark color, and much less students into this kind of area, the regional area. So basically, these 2 examples, what we were aiming to show is how, if you got a data set that does not contain latitude and longitude, you can still leverage locations that are in the file. And Tableau is able to recognize a number of them. So we saw here things like postcodes and LGA, which are county, but you also have other options like the state, the country, and also things like airport. So Tableau is able to understand all of them. So just rename that sheet to students by LGA. So now we want to go to the next level. And before we're actually trying to plot the individual school, what I want to do is I want to put together these 2 maps. So I want to superpose that one with that one. So just in order to not reinvent the wheel, I will start by duplicating this one here. So I can duplicate my sheet. So I already have my first layer. And now what I want to do, I want to add a dot for every single postcode. So traditionally, for people that have been using Tableau for a bit, we had the option to actually create what we call a dual axis map. So the way I will do it, so you don't have to do it, but just to illustrate my point, you were able to clone the latitude or longitude, and then you were able to go into your single layer, changing whatever you want, and then you can do like a dual axis, and then this way you will have the two maps on top of each other. You can still do that, but doing that technique, you are limited to 2 layers. And using the other technique, you will be able to have as many layers as you want. So I will close that one, and I will show you the second technique. So second technique, you basically have to bring whichever element with a globe next to it into your map. So here I want to pick up my postcode, and I will drag them onto my map layer like that. And so if you are using Tableau Desktop, it will work straight away. But if you are using a desktop which is like maybe not set up in Australia or anything like that, you might have a dot somewhere in the US. So if that happens, what you can do is that you can bring country onto your level of detail, so that you make sure that the postcode make sure that the system knows that the postcode are Australian based. So I think this was, yeah, so I've done most of it. Now what next thing to do is to bring my number of students onto my side like that. And so again, I've got small dot, big dots, and obviously I can play a bit with my formatting. So there's a lot of dots here and it's hard to see them. So you can always go to color and you can put a bit of a border, and you can also play a bit with the opacity. So you can make the thing a bit more transparent so that you can see when the dots are on the top of each other. All right, so I've done that. So it was section D of part 1. And I will just rename that one student by LGA and postcode. All right, so it is good, but right now we haven't leveraged at all the latitude and the longitude that we are into our data set. And now what we want to do is, instead of plotting postcode, I want to create a dot for every single school I have. So I will go into section E of the part 1. And again, I want to create 2 layers. So I will start by duplicating this one again. But now instead of bringing the postcode, I want to create a dot for each school. And so for that, we will introduce our first geospatial feature, which is called make point. So I've got a slide for it. I will go quickly on it. It's somewhere here. So the way it works is really straightforward. It's a function that has 2 parameters or 2 inputs. One is the latitude, the other one is the longitude, and that's it. And so what it does basically, it gives you the option to transform your data, your latitude and longitude that you may have in a CSV file or into an Excel file, into a geometry object. And we'll see that a bit later, but this will really open up functionality you can do. And in particular, we'll be able to do things like creating special joins, using map layers, and so on and so forth. And so this is a very powerful function that you have to use a lot when you are using Tableau. So let's go back to my desktop here. And I will create a new calculated field. So as you know, there's many options to do that. The one I generally use is this one. And then I go calculated field. I will name it school. And then I will use make point with my latitude and longitude. So we'll just make it a bit bigger. Very easy to do. I can click OK. Now I've got my new field here. And as you can see, there's a globe next to it. So whenever you've got a globe symbol, it means that Tableau recognizes it as a geometry object. And the cool thing with that is that I can use that geometry object as a layer. So what I can do next is I can simply drag this new field onto my mark layer like that. So when I'm doing this, you see that I've got indeed a dot for every single school. But yet, if I'm putting my mouse on one of the dots, it's highlight every single one of them. So that's the behavior that you have by default in Tableau when you are dealing with geometry objects. It doesn't deaggregate the data yet. Just consider the thing as one shape. So if you want to actually be able to select every individual dot, what you need to do is you need to deaggregate the data. So you need to bring to your level of detail something that identifies the schools. So it could be either the school code or it could be the school name. So let's say I will put school code, for instance, on my level of detail. And now I can see I can select one dot at a time. So if I want to understand which school it actually is, I can actually bring my school name onto my tooltip. Now I can actually see which school I'm dealing with. So the only thing I have to do is if I want to actually show the number of students, I can bring my number of students to the size. And something which is a bit confusing first time you use it is that it doesn't seem to do anything. Actually, it doesn't. It's because by default, when you use the automatic option, it doesn't factor in the size. So what you need to do before you do this or after you do this, you need to change the object type from automatic to circle. And then you see now I've got big dots and small dots. And as before, I can go and change the style. So I can put a bit of borders, I can play with opacity, and so on and so forth. So we pause a few seconds here, because obviously this was not too hard, but I just want to be sure that people were able to follow along. If you got any questions, like please shout or use the Q&A, because the next section will be a bit more complicated. Everything is okay, Grant?
Yeah, I think everyone's following along. Looking good. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. So what we do next is that we'll give the option for users to zoom in using the map itself. So instead of relying on the zoom features that we've seen here, what we want to do is that we want to be able to select a particular school, and then we want to see which school are next to it, and we want to define a radius for that. So first, what I want to do is I need to create parameters. And we'll create actually two parameters. One to be able to understand which latitude the person have selected, and the other one will be to say understand which longitude people have selected. All right. So to create a parameter, as you know, fairly easy. You go here, go to parameter, and this one will be called selected latitude, which should be a float. And maybe I want to display it so that we can test that everything's working. And then I will create another one, which will be very similar, which will be the selected longitude. So next, I don't want people to actually enter anything here. I want the map to drive what will be sending here. And so to do that is something I will be using something which is very, very helpful, and that has been introduced, I think, a couple of years ago, is this concept of parameter actions. So what is a parameter action? Is basically the option to select a mark and then to send the data which are against that mark to a parameter. So we'll create two of those, one that will fill up this latitude field, and the second one that will put the data into the selected longitude field. So I'm going to worksheet here, and I go action. And I will create, as I said, a parameter action. So it's called actually change parameter. So you can name it, you don't have to do it, but I think it's a bit cleaner. So first I will say I want to create one to set the latitude. My parameter will obviously be the selected latitude. And then my source field will be the one that does contain my latitude. Okay. Let's try that out. If I'm selecting any dots, you can see that it's actually changing this value here. So I achieve what I wanted. I will do the exact same thing for the longitude. So going back to worksheet, action, then change parameter, and I will do set longitude. This time I will select the other parameter, and I will select my longitude field. Again, I want to try that it's actually working. So I'm selecting location here. I can see that it changed that one. So this is good, and we'll see how we can leverage that in a few minutes. But first, I want to create another parameter, which will help to define the radius I want to consider. So again, going back to parameter, I will call it radius. This time, it doesn't have to be a float, because maybe I just want to deal with things like in kilometer. So I can change that to integer if I want. And again, don't have to do it, but you can define a range. So maybe I want to be able to select anything between, let's say, 2K and 100. And again, I will expose that parameter to the UI. So we see when I'm doing that, nothing happened, but we'll see in a minute how we can leverage that parameter. So if you people that were able to follow, I've been doing, I'm in the middle of section F. I'll be doing everything from 1 to step 6. So what I want to do next is I want to materialize the school I've selected. So whenever I'm clicking on a dot like that, I want to actually make a point, make a geometry object out of these two parameters. So as you could have guessed, I will use again this make point feature function. But this time, instead of using the data which are in the data set, I will use the data from my parameter. So I'm going in here, create a calculated field, which I will be calling selected school. And I will use again my make point function. So this time I will not use latitude and longitude. I will use selected latitude and selected longitude. So now what I want to do next is I want to calculate the distance in between my selected school.
Hey, Mark, just a comment coming through the chat, just if you could keep it a little bit slower. I think we're getting a bit more complicated now, so a little pause between each bit would be great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so just to recap what we've been doing so far, before I'm going to the next phase, I want to give the option to people to select a dot. This will be the school I'm using as a reference. And then what I want to do, I want to only display the schools which are within a particular distance from that school. So that's why we've been introducing this radius parameter. So now what I want to do next is I basically want to compare the distance in between the selected school and all the other schools. Because at the end of the day, I only want to keep the one which are within radius. So we'll be introducing a new function here, which is the distance function, which is this one. So show it for a few seconds. So in the past, the only way you could do that was to be like an expert into trigonometry. So you had to understand like this kind of formula, right? So that was the old way to calculate the distance. I think it was somewhere in 2019 X. There was this, sorry, going backwards, this distance function. And so essentially the way it works, pretty easy. You have 3 inputs. First is your origin, then your destination, and then the unit you want to use. So both origin and destinations needs to be points and a geometry object. So the way to create those will be to use the make point function. And so in terms of unit of measure, you've got a lot of options available. So if you are in the metric area, like in Australia, you can use meter and kilometers. If you are in the US, you can use miles and feet. And you've got many options to actually type the way you want. So you can like put meters this way, American way, or this way, or you can actually just use the later. So let's go back to Tableau. I will create a new field in here called distance from selected school. So as I say, basically it's a distance function with 2 parameters. So start and end. So it doesn't really matter whether which one starts with which one is end, because at the end of the day, distance is a distance. So I can use my selected school, for instance, as a start. And then I will use the school field as a destination. And then because we're in Australia, we use metric system. So maybe I want to do it in kilometer. Okay, so fairly easy. As I said, you could have reverse. So you can have distance between school and selected school. That would be exactly the same thing. So if I want to check that it's actually working, I can bring that onto my level of details or onto my toolkit. So if I'm doing this, now if I'm putting my mouse on any of the school, it tells me the distance compared to whichever was my selected school. If I'm changing the one I'm using, so for instance, now my selected school is this one, you will see that now my distance go to 0, and the school nearby will have a small number of kilometers. But if I'm selecting a school like this, it's very far away from that particular school. So let's go back and click one around Sydney. And so what I want to do next is that I want to use this as a filter. So what I will be doing, I will creating another parameter, another field, which will just compare the distance and the radius. So nothing crazy hard in here. I will just call it like within radius. And then I want, that you can actually drag and drop, so I can do distance like that. And I want to make it less or equal to my radius. So again, if I want to check that it's actually working, I can bring that to my color. And you see that I have orange dots, which are the one being distance, and blue dots, the one in blue. And if I'm changing that, you can see that the orange are growing. Okay. But what I want to do, in fact, here is I don't want to just put the colors. I want to use it as a filter. So instead of putting here as on the color, I will just drag this field onto my filter. And then I just say I want to use the true. So I just want to display the dots within the distance. So I got this like that. It's just because I actually use like I fix my maps. But if I reset map, you see that it's actually changing. It's actually zooming on the area. And you can say that I can change my zoom level, and I will see more or less scores. So the last thing I want to do is, it's good to have that, but it's a bit hard to materialize which school has been used as a reference. And I think it would be a good thing if we can actually display the school along with the actual radius. So we already have our selected school dots here, but maybe we want to create a circle that will represent this with the radius. And so what I will be introducing here is another feature, which is called buffer. So how does buffer work? Is basically you first need to have a point that you could have created using make point. And then you will use buffer against this new field with two additional parameters. One will be the radius, the other one will be the unit of measure. So for instance, I can say I want to display a buffer, this circle here, around each of my large airports, and I want to display a 30-mile radius around them. And so when you do that, basically the circle actually have a meaning. The circle actually, the size of the circle actually represents the actual surface that you want to display. So it's not like if you are using a symbol map where you can actually make the size you want, but this size doesn't represent anything. Generally, it's used to represent a measure. In that particular scenario, what we want to do, we want actually to have the size of the circle to exactly be the surface that you want to represent. So going back in there, I will create a new field, and to be the last one for that particular section. And I will call it selected area. So again, I will say use my buffer function here. First parameter is a geometry object. So that will be my selected school. And then I will put my radius. So this is my parameter here. And last, that will be my unit of measure. So here we are dealing with kilometers. So therefore I'm using kilometers. Yeah. So when I'm doing that, basically I'm using the geometry object or a point as an input. And this, as you will see in a second, create another object. But this time it will be actually a special object, like an area. And so because I've got this globe next to it, I can bring this along and create a new mark layer with it. And it's what I was trying to explain before. Using that technique, you can have more than 2 layers. In that particular scenario, we actually have 3 layers. So I've got the LGA here, then I've got the dot for each school, and then I got these big dots or big circle that represent the area. So obviously this doesn't look very good at the moment, so I can play along with the formatting. So for instance, what I'll be doing here, maybe I want to put some sort of yellow area, and I want it to be much less opaque so that I can see what is underneath. So if I'm doing that, it's kind of cool, but you can see that it's very hard to select the dots. So there are some instances where you want to display something, but you don't want to be able to select it because it's just here for reference. And so if that happens, what you need to do is to go to the mark, and then you can say, I want to disable selection. So by doing that, it's still here, but basically I cannot select the shape by itself. So it's just here to display that yellow circle. So I will pause for a few seconds to check that everybody is okay. And again, is there any question? I'm happy to take them. So far, so good. So we'll go to the last part, or last section of that part, and then we'll have a little break before we into the next one. So people will have a chance to go to the bathroom or just grab a coffee. But the break will have to be short. So as I explained before, we only dealt with one data set so far. Now what we want to do is that we want to deal with the second one, which was to display the station entrance next to my schools. So, and it's something which is relatively new, is that you are now able to create multiple layers, even if the data are into separate data sources. So what I will do next is I will create a new data source. So as you know, you can go into data, new data source, and then I will use the same menu here. We are also dealing with the CSV file. So I go into my text file option, and this time I will select my station entrance CSV instead of the schools one. So now you can see the data set is pretty simple. I've got a row for each train station, in fact, a row for each entrance. And then I've got the latitude and longitude of every single one of them. So if I'm going back onto the last visa created, this one here, or which one is this one? If I want to use my station entrance, I will use my second data set. And so if I want to be able to create another layer, I first need to have a geometry object into my data set. If I'm going in there, you can see that I got latitude and longitude, but this will not really work. Like I'm not sure if I can do that. I can probably do, but it doesn't do much because this is technically not something I can plot on the map. So first, what I need to do is I need to create a geometry, a point that will materialize my train station entrance. So again, I will use the exact same logic. I will use my make point function. So I'm going into here. This time I will call it station. And I will use the make point function along with the latitude and the longitude of my train station. just like that. And so what I can do next is I can drag this one onto my map, and that will be my fourth layer. So when you do this, it's actually zooming out, and we see how to fix that. And you can see that I've got, like, I can see people that are living in New South Wales. I can actually see all the train lines like that. As we saw before, when you do this, it's actually only creating one shape. So if you want to be able to select individual points, what you need to do is to bring something that identifies the train station or the entrance on the level of details. So I can go in here and put like that, and put train station and entrance. I keep off them. Now when putting my mouse, I'm able to select individual train stations. The last thing I want to actually, so before, like, if I want to make it clearer, I can also change the type of symbol. So here, what I can go here, I can say I want to have a square. Maybe I want to have them red or orange, something like that. And again, I can play a bit with formatting, so I can have something like that. So if you want to do something a bit more fancy, you can always go and, you can use the shapes. And then if you got a symbol, so actually, I think I did it in the past, you could actually create a custom shape. That one. I think it's this one here. You could download a shape that represents your train stations. There's a special folder for them. And then you can make reference to them. So for instance, here I can say, actually want to have this symbol. And I will have my little dots, little like symbols that represent my train stations. So last thing I want to do is maybe, that we played along with the radius and things like that. So I don't want to be able to see every single train stations. I just want to see the one that are next to this area here. And you can obviously leverage your parameters, but there's a much quicker way to do is if you go back to the station mark, you can say I want to remove the add to zoom extent. So when I'm doing this, you see what happened? Basically, it zoomed the map in order to just show what is not far away from the other marks. So it's a quick way to just zoom in on what you want. So that's it for part one. We'll pause for if there's a few questions, and if there isn't, then we can have a 5-minute break. No questions, as far as I can tell, Brand?
Yep, no questions, Mark. You're doing well.
Okay. So yeah, it's 11:52. So if you can, we have a break until 11:57, just 5 minutes. I'm not giving you too much because there's still quite a lot of content to cover, but I will start at 11:57. So. And we'll do part two. All right, so little break is finished, and we're going to part 2. So part 2 will travel a bit overseas. Instead of seeing things in New South Wales, we'll be dealing with something completely different. We'll be dealing with volcano in Hawaii. So I will just show a few slides to introduce the dataset. So we'll be dealing with this time 4 datasets. First one is a shapefile, and will basically show the lava that has occurred, I think it was in 2019, in a particular volcano in the main island of Hawaii. So I don't know much about the geography of Hawaii, so I'll not elaborate too much on it. But you will see, we'll be able to see how the thing has been progressing along the different weeks or even months. Then we'll be dealing with a second file that contains the list of structures or buildings into the big island of Hawaii. And we'll be able to understand which structures had been impacted by the eruption. Third, we'll have a look at which roads have been impacted. So again, we'll be using another shapefile in here that contains the list of the roads in Hawaii, and we'll be able to understand how many have been impacted by the lava flow. And last, I'm sure we'll have time to do that, but if we have time, we'll be showing what we call the tephra, which is actually the layers of ash that has been here because of the lava flow eruption. All right, so let's go and jump into Tableau. So you can use the same workbook, or if you want, you can create a brand new one. Doesn't really matter. So first thing is I will need to create my new data source. So I will go back to my data menu, go new data source. And this time, instead of using a text file, I will use a special file. So if you do it that way, you can actually point to a CHP file. But what you can do as well is that you can point to the actual zip that contains the CHP along with the other files. So something worth mentioning is that if you do download a file, the CHP file by itself is not self-sufficient. So you need to have all the file that comes along with that CHP file. So here I've got a zip. I can directly point to the zip, and that will make reference to all the files that are linked to that file. So I can go in there, and now I can see what we have. Okay. So you can see that's a data set that is a bit more complicated. There's flow time, so basically when the thing has happened. Then you got information about the length, the area, and you can see that I've got a bunch of geometry objects, which are all polygons. So I will create a brand new sheet in here. And first, before doing anything else, just to make it a bit clearer, you can see that when you deal with shapefiles, it's always creating an object of field called geometry. And because we have multiple layers, my recommendation will always be to rename those. So here, what we are dealing with in that scenario is the actual lava flow. So I will rename that to be lava flow. Similarly, what I want to do is I want to be able to understand how it changes over time. And I've got a field for that called flow time 1, which is at the moment, it's a string for some reason. So I need to change that to being date time. So I'm going on it, and I say I want to change my data type to be a date and time field. So when it's done, I can just double click on my lava flow object, and then it will materialize my lava flow. So if I'm going a bit zoom out, you see that this is Hawaii, the main island, the big island. And then you can see the rest of the Hawaii area. I'll just go back here. And as we said before, when you do a link to a geometry object, it actually creates one symbol. And so you can actually select an individual area. So if I want to break this down, I can, for instance, bring my flow time field onto my level of details. And I can do something like I want to have it like discrete. So that basically create one single, I can individually select each of my flow time like that. All right. So now maybe I want to understand the area of each of those. So we're introducing a new feature, so a new function called area, which is very easy to understand, is basically this. So basically, it uses two parameters. One will be your polygon that you want to assess the area for, and then that will be the unit of measure. So in the screenshot here, it's in miles, but you can also use all the one that we did discuss before. So for instance, we can put kilometers. So going back to Tableau, I will create my field, and I will call it lava area. And I will call my function area. And I will use my lava flow as input. And second one will be my unit measure, kilometer. So I can do that. And then I can just bring that to whatever I want. So for instance, I can put to my tooltip. So now if I'm putting my mouse, I can assess the surface of each lava area. All right, so we've been doing the section A, if you're following the script. Now I want to play a bit with other things. So maybe what I want to do, I want to be able to play along with, maybe I want to display the dates. So what I can do, I can go back on here and remove my float time here. And I can say I want to display my float time onto my color. So if what I'm doing here is that I'm using the right click when I'm dragging, so that I can actually select what I want. So for instance, if I'm selecting month, like that, you will display a different color for each month of when the eruption has started. So if you do this, okay, so this is actually the wrong one, it's continuous, but it already give you a bit of sense. So it started back in May 2018, which was the green section. And then you can see that it progressed into the northeast of the island all the way until August 1st. Right now, I'm using what we call a continuous month, but I can actually change that, and I can say actually want to use the discrete like that. And if I'm doing that, you can see that right now I can clearly identify everything that has happened in May, and then going to June, July, and August. So if I want to make the flow more visible and I want to play it along the time, I will go into section B2. Okay, so what I will be doing now is that instead of putting my month of flow time onto my level or onto my color, I will actually put that onto my filter. Sorry, my page. So I'm going back here, and maybe I will use discrete in here. And then you can see that you can select any point of time. It will show you where it is. But I want it to be a bit more easier, and I want to see how things are progressing. So I will play along with the options with the animations. So that's one of the only things that you can only do in desktop. You don't have this option, unfortunately, to do it on Tableau Cloud. But I want to show you how it looks in Tableau Desktop. So first, I need to play along with the animations. So I go into Format. I go into Animations. And then first, I need to turn off the animations. Then what I need to do next is that I need to play a bit with the history. So I need to show history. And then there's a number of options when you do that. I want to display whole history. So I will select the all option. And I will uncheck fade because I want the thing to stick. And if I'm doing that, hopefully if it's working, I can play my animation by clicking that button. So I can see things progressing, starting all the way here. Then it's growing. So you can see the thing moving along the time. I can make it a bit faster by playing this one. You can see the thing going. So you can really see how it progresses over time. Pretty cool, isn't it? So we've been doing section C. And now we'll be going to section D, where we want to add the buildings to it. So we introduce my second data set. And this time, instead of creating a new data source, I will actually show you how you can leverage, you can put together into one data source, both the lava flow along with the building. So I'm going onto my data source menu here. And instead of going new data source, I will not do that. I will go and click the add button, which is next to connection. So by doing that, essentially what I'm doing is that I'm making reference to another file, but I want to add that file to a connection. And then I will be able to put together these two files into one single data source. So I will go in the add menu here. And this time I will make reference to, I think it's a text file. It's text file or it's Excel. It's a text file. So I'm going text file here. And I will be pointing to my second folder buildings. And I will select my Big Island Hawaii CSV file. So now what I want to do, I want to group together, mix together these two files, the shape file along with that CSV file. And so to do that, we'll be introducing a function which is super important in Tableau, which is the concept of creating a special join. So essentially, how does this work? You can create a special join in between a polygon and a point. So you know lava flow is a polygon because you got the actual contour of each lava flow. But then I want to be able to intersect that with each individual building. And so in that data set, the one I just introduced, I've got the latitude and longitude. I will use the make point function that we've introduced before to actually create a point out of it. And then we'll have polygon on one side and then a point on the other side. And therefore, I will be able to use that intersect function. So just worth mentioning that in that scenario, we're showing polygons against points. But I think it was around a year ago, we introduced more options. So for instance, I think from the top of my head, you can do an intersection between line and polygon or line and lines and even polygon and polygon. So you can really create a data set that will take all these different options together. So let's go back into Tableau. So in order to create the intersect, I need to actually create a join first. And so to do that, for people that have been using Tableau for a bit, since we've been introducing this concept of relationships, you don't want to create a relationship, you want to create a join. So therefore, I need to double click onto my table. And now we'll be able to create my join. And so now what I will be doing is that I will be putting my CSV file next to my shape file like that. And you can see that the UI is now creating a join. So on the left-hand side, the only thing I need to do is I need to select my lava flow, which is already a geometry object. On the right-hand side, right now, I only have a CSV with latitude and longitude. I want to make a point out of it. So I will be going here, and I will create a join calculation, which will be make point, then latitude, and longitude. Okay, I got that. I can click OK. And because now I've got a correct configuration, I can change my type of join, and I can specify the system what I want to do intersects. So when you're doing this, we're creating a join, and as all the other joins, you need to select what kind of join you want. So if I'm selecting inner, basically it will say I only want to keep the lava flow and the buildings where there is something in common, where they do intersect. But then I can say I don't want to lose any lava flow, so I will use the left join, or I don't want to lose any building, I will use the right join, or I don't want to lose anything, therefore I will use the full outer join. So here, what I will be doing here, I will use the left join because I want to see my entire data flow, but it doesn't really matter whether I'm excluding some of the building. So I only want to keep the building that has been impacted by the lava flow. So going back to my sheet, right now I still have only my lava flow. And now what I want to do, I want to display my buildings. So remember, right now in my data set, I have a geometry object, which is the lava flow, but I don't have yet a geometry object for my actual buildings. So I need to create those. And as you know, in the fourth time, maybe we use function. Are we using the make point function again? So we're using make point with latitude and longitude. And I will call that structure. So now I can bring this object onto my mark layer. And probably not very obvious because we are using the same color, but I can put a different color for my structure. So I can go and select circle, and I can select maybe an orange. So now you can see the buildings that did intersect in one way or the other with the actual data flow. Okay. And yeah, I've got the option a bit. If you go here, you can play along, say you don't want to have any yellow, and you can even put some borders around, something like that. And something I forgot to do, if you actually want to be able to see, to select the individual buildings, you need to bring in the ID of the building onto your level of detail. And now we'll be able to select, actually there's no more now. You can actually see all these buildings that are linked to my data flow. All right, so this is cool, but right now I'm a bit selected because I use the left option, the left join option. Maybe I want to see more buildings, and I want to see only the one that has been, I want to highlight the one that has been impacted by the lava flow. So remember when we create the join, we created the left join. I will show you what is happening if I'm going and change that to a full outer join. So if I'm doing this, and if I'm going back to my map, what's going to happen is that it will show all buildings. See, this is now got buildings. My data set contains the building for the entire big island. And therefore, you can see that I'm showing everything. And it's very hard to see where the lava flow was. So obviously, I can change a bit the size of this, creating smaller dots. But still, we are showing a bit too much. Okay. So you can obviously go and try to zoom a bit. You can actually go here. You can move along the map. So what I want to do maybe is I want to highlight the buildings that has been impacted. And so one way to do that is to use the intersect function. So it's one of the last functions that I will be introducing. The way it works, I think it's this one here. Where is it? Maybe I forgot to put a slide for it. Yeah, this one here. So essentially, it's when you create the intersect function, it's intersecting between a geometry object. So actually two geometry objects, but one can be a polygon, the other one could be a point. And this will return a Boolean. So let's go back there. I will create my function, and I will call it in lava flow. And I will call it intersect of lava flow, I think it is, and structure. And now what I can do, I can actually bring this onto my color. So it's probably too small to see. My size of the circle are a bit too small. But if I'm doing this, now you can clearly see. You can see all these buildings in orange have been impacted. The one in blue has not been. And if I want to make it clearer, I can actually zoom it a bit more. And zoom, and then I can move on my map to focus on where the things are. All right, so we've done F. So the only thing that was remaining in F is what I could do potentially is because it's a Boolean. Instead of using it as a color, my intersect, I can use it as a filter. So if I'm going back here, I can say I just want to select the one which are intersecting. And essentially what the result of that, I'm not sure it does that, but what did I do? It's because of the flow. So if I'm moving my page here, like that. So basically by doing that, I'm back to a first situation, which would be exactly as if I was creating the left join. I'm just showing the lava flow along with the buildings that have been impacted by the lava flow. All right, we'll do, I think we've got, what, 12 minutes more? I will probably have time to do the G, and then we see if we got the last, to the last one. So what I want to do next is I want to display the damaged roads. Okay, so again, what we'll be doing here is that we'll add this new file into my data set. So I'm going back into my data source tab, and it's another shapefile. So I need to go to add menu. I will select spatial file. And this time I will be selecting the third one, which is roads. And so when you do that straight away, system say, okay, now you want to create a special join. And the cool thing is that in that scenario, we don't need to create the make point function, because essentially lava flow is already a geometry object, a polygon, and the roads is also a polygon. And so I don't have to create make point or anything like that. The only thing I need to do is to select my intersect function. So again, I can think about what I want to do here. Maybe I want to create a left join. So I want to keep everything into my lava flow, but I only want to display the roads that have been impacted. So now if I'm going back to my sheet 5, maybe if I want to make it to be clearer, I can rename my field. Remember, it's whenever you deal with a shape file, it will always be called geometry. Maybe I want to be clearer that it's actually roads. So I can go back there, call it roads. And then I can just drag this one as a new layer to my map. And you can start to see things going on. So right now I've got one, again, it's a shape file, so it only creates one shape. But if I want to be able to select individual roads, I can do onto my roads data source, which is this one here. And I can bring something like the name, for instance, onto my level of detail. Now I can select individual roads. And if I wanted to make it a bit clearer, I can actually change the type, so the color, sorry. So I can go and put them in, I don't know, maybe purple like that. Makes sense. So you can actually see now which building has been impacted by the data flow, along with which road has been impacted by the data flow. I will just show you quickly the last one, because I think we've got like a few more minutes. Let's say we want to visualize the ash. So this time I will create a new data source, and then we create a new sheet, and then we put the layer back. So if I'm going onto a data menu, this time we select new data source. And I will be, it's another special file. So we'll be using special file option. I will be pointing this time to folder 4. And what we want to display here is the level of ash. Okay, so I got the information in here. I will create a brand new sheet just to make it clearer. So I can rename. I don't have to do that, but if I want, I can call it ash or tephra. Now, if I'm double clicking on it, I've got this thing, and maybe I want to display a different color based on the thickness of the ash. So I can bring that thick max one onto my color. And now you can see, okay, this one is a small amount. But if I'm going to this one here in the center, it's actually quite thick, 50 centimeters worth of ash. So if I want to put this in context, and maybe I want to make it clearer, I can play a bit with my background maps. Maybe I can display like satellite, something we haven't played along with, but still available, like that. And just want to show you that you can actually put the other layers without having to recreate any data source. So you can actually create these multiple layers, even the data sources are distinct from each other. So I can go back into the other data source that contain all the joins, and then I will be able, for instance, to display my buildings. So if I'm going here, I still have my structure element, and then can bring back it to here. Now again, because right now I'm showing everything, but again, remember something we've been seeing at the start. You can use this add to zoom extent option and remove it. And now we see the buildings along with the level of ash. And I can go and add the roads in a similar way. And so on and so forth. So I can play along with the formatting. So we stop here my little demonstration. But hopefully you've got a good sense of everything we can do in terms of mapping. So we've been covering a lot of ground here. We're showing at the start how you can deal with data sets that just contain location like state, postcode, or LGA. Then we saw how we can actually display things like individual schools. And then the last example, we've been seeing how you can really put together a lot of layers. And it doesn't really matter whether you've got things in the shapefile or if you got CSVs. And then you are able essentially to use this intersect function, which really gives like a lot of power, because you can really focus on what you want. So I will pause for see if there's any questions on that. Hopefully this was a bit helpful.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think everyone's probably going through a bit of mind blown right now. Just let it be known that we will share the recording. It might take a couple of days, but we'll get it to you. So if you do want to go through anything again, of course, you'll have that available to you. And of course, there was the Excel files that had the steps that you can walk through too. But if you do have any questions, now's the time, post them in, and we'll be sure to answer them before you go on your way. Getting lots of really good feedback, Mark, but no actual questions.
All right, cool. So I just put the last slide here. So this was second section I presented out of the presentation I've been doing at TC23. But be glad to know that there will be many more, and including one that has been presented by Grant, which is doing all this monitoring thing. So I think, Grant, you want to elaborate a bit more on that, on what you will be presenting on the 20th of July?
Sure, yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar, we added a new certification in Tableau about 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, called the Data Analyst Certification. It's a little bit different to some of the other certs. So if you've done them before, you might be in for some shocks if you just enroll. So it's a really good session for anyone that's thinking about taking that exam. We'll go through lots of hints, tips, how to study and how to make sure you get through that exam. So stay tuned. That session will go for about 40 minutes and will be taking place on Thursday. Cool. It's probably worth also calling out too, just on the right there, we've got the Salesforce Plus. If you haven't used that before, there's a lot of really good content on there. In particular, if you go in there, log in, you'll be able to select from the events at the top and go to Tableau Conference, and you'll be able to find a number of sessions that are on there. So we had even an Australian session. We had Sam Batchelor presented. She had a sold out crowd as well. So there's some really good sessions on there to find out about some of the new features and some of the best practices that our community have brought along with them in their presentations.
Excellent. So I think that's it. No questions. I think we can wrap up. So thanks a lot for your time, and hopefully it was helpful. So if you got any questions, like please free to reach out. Like I'm really passionate about maps, and I would be happy to have a look at your challenges. Thanks a lot, Grant, everybody.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.